Welcome to the HR Empowerment Podcast, where we will uncover strategies and new insights from HR professionals who discuss up-to-date regulations, best practices, and the most pressing topics like diversity and equity, leadership, dealing with difficult situations, and much more that affect your bottom line and business. Thanks for joining us.
Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady, with my co-host JC.
Aloha.
Guess what we're talking about in this episode?
Destruction of your soul.
Destruction of your soul. This series is about dealing with difficult people. And we want to talk a little bit, in real life terms, of how do you stop a difficult person from, destroying your morale, whether this is at work or at home. Note that my podcast is mainly for in the workplace, but I always say, hint, hint, this works at home too.
What do you got to do? Do you stop reacting to people, Wendy? Do you discover new interests? Do you try to upskill to kill those negative thoughts? I don't know. Dealing with tough people, it's challenging. But dealing with a problematic coworker that could completely derail your entire day and destroy your spirits is even harder. We spend so much time at work. Negative people can have a huge impact on our sense of belonging, our psychological safety, and our productivity. No one likes dealing with tough people, but it doesn't have to destroy your day, your week, the workplace, or your soul, your spirit, your heart. And there's sometimes very little that you could do to influence change on that. So how do you stop them?
I would say before you go running to HR, which we are going to talk about a little bit because there is a time for that as well. But before you do that, remember that they are a human being just like you are. And we as human beings are more likely to make changes in our life when somebody like a peer comes to us, says, hey, when you said this in that meeting, this is how it made me feel. And I really, want to talk about what you meant there and if we can have different types of conversations moving forward. You see how I said that? It was like, this is how it made me feel. It wasn't, hey, you're a jerk and you need to stop being a jerk.
Right.
Because everybody responds really well when you call them a jerk. Not.
You know what's interesting, though, too? If a company treats its workers badly or doesn't trust them, it could set the stage for a real tough situation that crushes and destroys souls as well. Managers always have something bad to say about workers. But some work cultures have deep mistrust of those who actually do the work. And that's not for anything other than the structure of the organization or maybe someone within the leadership chain and long-standing beliefs. And sometimes that stuff isn't even said out loud, but you can see it sometimes between the lines in policies. Policies that are meant to keep people in place instead of assuming that everybody has good intentions. So would it then be fair to say that if we are looking to evolve our culture, and if we are looking not to promote the destruction of souls, hearts, and minds, and have it misconstrued, that maybe it's a good relook at, quote, ourselves, like you mentioned in a previous episode, but not ourselves as a person, but ourselves as the cultural entity of an organization, to say, do our policies, do what we have written and in place accurately reflect who we want to be culturally? It's a really good strategic question.
It absolutely is. And it's hard. So for our listeners today that are sitting there going, you know what, I'm on my way to work right now. And I know I've got to deal with a difficult person and I don't want to deal with this difficult person. Cut yourself some slack because it is hard. I'm the HR lady and there's many times that I have to prep myself for conversations. And that's where I want to remind you to practice. Maybe role play some conversations and then what if scenarios. If I say this, they might say this. Okay, well, be prepared then for that. For me personally, I like to, if I have to call out a difficult person, if it gets to me at that point, I'm going to, they probably have already been warned in some manner. But I like to give them a heads up that, hey, at 11 o'clock, we're going to be having a meeting. And these are the three things that I want to talk about so that you're not taking them off guard as well. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, boy, I'm just giving them time to, dig up more information and be more negative. that might be the truth, but what you are doing is you're showing them respect, so it's not a surprise attack. You're showing them a respect that I respect you, and I want you to be prepared for our meeting at 11 o'clock, and we're going to talk about what happened in our conference call yesterday, or whatever it might be. Does that make sense?
It does, and your phrase right there is something I want to talk about real quick while we're on this topic. Slang.
What phrase was that?
Slang, jargon, and trendy terms. We hear it all the time. Does that make sense? You know, people who don't know the lingo sometimes might not understand the meaning behind what's being said. They could even feel left out. They could feel left alone, or they could be misconstruing what you're saying and viewing it as sarcasm. And we see that sometimes in the workplace when people use that question in response, in very simply saying, does that make sense? Depending on the person's tonality, their body actions, and the way it comes across, they could actually be perceived as difficult by always asking whether or not something makes sense, which could be misconstrued then as you don't have the cognitive ability to understand the words that I'm saying, rather than like the way that you said it to me, which was just casual and off the cuff. Two friends talking. It's really intriguing at the end of the day.
It really is. That's an excellent point.
If that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
If that makes sense.
Dude, that makes sense. It's so true though. It's all about, your vocabulary and your tone and inflection. And that's why live conversations are the best and the preferred method in human resources, especially when you're dealing with what is perceived as either a difficult person or a difficult situation. Practice, practice, practice. Super, super important. And this may also work at home where you're sitting in your driveway going, okay, I need to have this difficult conversation with another individual that lives in my household. Let me role play it with myself, even though my neighbors probably think I'm crazy talking to myself. But let me say it out loud and go, ooh, that sounded negative. Oh, let me restate that. And then after all of that, when all else fails, this is according to an article on betterup.com, when all else fails, eject. And what that means is you don't have to stay in a conversation or in a room with somebody who may be verbally attacking you, who may make you feel uncomfortable and less than. You can walk away from difficult people. Now, in the workplace, you can't just go, gotta go, I'm out of here, see you guys next week. But you can say, I gotta go to my manager. I got to go to my director.
Ooh.
Or in the cases that if it's also something, much more important, not important, but legal, like bullying, harassment, sexual conduct, threats, physical threats, that's when you do go to human resources or your legal department. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, or you could take a swerve on that, Wendy, and you could just very simply say, just hang on a second, I'll be right back. And don't come back. Just keep doing that to the person until it turns into a conversation. Right?
Do not listen to him.
It's like when you're out with your friends at that happy hour and you're like, oh, hang on, I'll be right back. But you always disappear and leave. And you're back on your couch by 8 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, don't disappear on your colleagues, but you can say something like, you know what? This conversation's going nowhere and I don't want us to be arguing. So I'm going to go take a walk. I'm going to take a breather. Maybe we could reconvene this later. So
absolutely. Hey, Wendy, I'll be right back. Hang on. I'll be right back.
I'll be right back. Folks, we will be right back in episode 5 of Dealing with Difficult People and Situations.
Thank you for joining the HR Empowerment Podcast, brought to you by Aurora Training Advantage. We hope you've gained new insight and strategies to navigate the HR profession. We look forward to you joining us again on the HR Empowerment Podcast.